Welcome to Real Talk with Resident D. I'm your host, Resident D. On today's episode, I have Andy Bennetts. Andy is a passionate advocate for financial empowerment and the founder of Empower Wealth Solutions. Drawing from his background in education and leadership, Andy now helps individuals and families break free from debt and build lasting wealth. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Thank you, Reginald D. I so appreciate you giving me a chance to talk to you, sir.
Absolutely. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know you're a busy man.
Absolutely. It's something I've been looking forward to.
Yes, sir. So, Andy, can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what your family life and childhood was like?
Absolutely. Yep. I am beyond fortunate to have grown up in a strong Christian household. We've got a legacy of just solid Christian people that goes back multiple generations. My grandpa is still alive in his 80s, and he's a phenomenal man, one of my absolute heroes. And he's just created this legacy, just strong family relationships, strong marriages. So I just grew up around just amazing role models, top to bottom. So I think that's very uncommon nowadays. And the older I get, the more I realize how blessed I am. So just beyond blessed with growing up with a great family, great church. And live in Southwest Colorado. It's a little town called Cortez. Have you ever seen Four Corners, like where they intersect like that? We are in the far, far southwest corner, close to Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. And that's kind of in the middle of nowhere. I'm about 6 to 7 hours away from all the big cities. So Denver's, 7 hours away, and Phoenix is 6 hours away, and Salt Lake City. So we're kind of in the middle of nowhere, honestly.
Sometimes that's a good place to be.
It's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. Yep. So yeah, I've lived a very, very blessed life. My background's in education. I was a teacher and administrator for about 10 years and got called into that at church camp, honestly, and I thought that's what I would be doing the rest of my life, and switched gears and went over to technology, and I continue to do that. I have a technology company, and just recently I got into this financial industry with Empower Wealth Solutions, and I'm so excited about that because it feels like my teacher heart is now full again. I get to help people solve real problems and help them see that there is hope after their mortgage, right? There's a ways to get out of mortgage a lot faster than what the banks would tell you there. So it's been a fun journey. I'm on the beginning stages, but that's going to be a wild ride for sure.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So, Andy, what inspired you to shift from a background in education and leadership into the world of financial empowerment and the passion for helping others achieve their debt freedom?
So I think it really is, and I think God works this way where things that maybe seem separate end up kind of weaving together. So my time as an educator and time as a teacher kind of led into the technology aspect, and there I've learned how to be a leader and run a team and different things, and networking and traveling and different things like that, and taught thousands of people literally all over the world, both in person and virtually. So that is kind of led me into this idea of the Empower Wealth Solutions, but it's kind of a full circle moment because it's back in the community here. I am helping people nationwide, but I'm actually running a workshop starting next week about financial literacy, debt elimination, and that kind of stuff. So it's kind of using all those skills that I've learned throughout the years, but now I'm able to give back to my community and give people hope. So it's kind of been a fun journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, here's the biggest thing that I want the listeners to get.
Okay.
What are the biggest myths people believe about debt and financial freedom?
Woo, that's a big, how much time we got, sir?
Go with it, man.
There you go. All right. Honestly, I think that debt is normal. I think that's the biggest lie, the biggest thing that people just have been led to believe. In my research and my education of finances and where we're at as Americans and where we've come from, it's not that long ago that debt was a dirty word, like putting things on like a mortgage or a credit card. That's a relatively new thing. Within the last couple generations, we've gone from never putting anything on a credit card to now you can't buy your couch without having a credit card. So just the transition, that speedy transition from it being kind of a dirty word to that is just our way of life. I think that's been one thing that's just been eye-opening to me. So sorry, that's kind of my initial answer. Remind me of the question again. I want to make sure that I answer you fully.
What are the biggest myths people believe about debt and financial freedom?
Yeah, so I think one of the myths is that debt is just a reality. You're always going to have debt. There's no way to get out of debt. I think that's another one that I'm trying to dispel. Again, I use the word hope and empower. I think those two words resonate with them a lot just because people do live hopeless. People don't feel empowered. But if they are giving a light at the end of the tunnel and a very specific plan of this is how you can go from 30 years in a mortgage and just drowning in debt and condense that time and get that down to 15, 10 years and save hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's a conversation that I love having with people because people are not aware of that and they just feel like they're just going to be stuck in debt forever. Let me see if I can pull this up. Let me ask you a question while I'm trying to do this. Do you know where the term mortgage came from?
No, tell me.
Here you go, right here. Mortgage literally means death pledge. How
Wow.
sad is that?
Wow.
Mort is death, right? And gage is a pledge. So you're literally making a pledge until you die that you're going to be paying this off. And that's, again, a little bit of a bummer. But again, if we can condense that time, save money, and save time and years off of that debt, that's a really fun conversation to have with people because, again, if they don't know, then you just feel like you have to live with that and that's just your reality. So I'm trying to change realities.
Yeah. And I think, Andy, that people, when it comes to money or when it comes to debt,
Yep.
it is a kryptonite to a lot of things. I mean, people like marriages and things like that, and people commit suicide because of simple things called debt.
Yep.
And what I'm glad you said something about that because here's the thing. I think a lot of people that look at the hitting debt.
Mm-hmm.
They say, all right, I can go out here and go to this loan shark finance company to get a car with this high interest rate. And all you see is that, all I know is pay $300 a month. Yeah, I can afford it. But over time, you paid, if the car was $25,000, I know somebody personally that went and got a truck with it, had this high interest rate.
Mm-hmm.
And the truck was $25,000 and ended up paying like $60,000 for the truck.
Wow. Wow.
And people don't understand the hidden part of it. All they see is what they can afford.
Right. Yeah.
And that's not the way it works.
Right. Can I give your listeners, and again, I will explain it. I'm writing this out as we're talking about it, but let me just give you some mortgage math here just to kind of drive that home. All right. So we're going to say $400,000. So $400,000 on your principal loan. Okay. We're going to say an interest rate of about 6%. Okay. Sometimes you can get higher than that. Like that's probably pretty accurate about right now. And we'll say a 30 year, so 360 months. Okay. I understand some people can go lower than that. So sorry, this is not the right one. What I wanted to get at, this is not the right little slide here. Hold on here. There we go. That's the one I needed. Okay, 400. And then the stated interest, there we go, 6%. Again, this is on a 30-year loan. So you would think 6% of $400,000, you're going to think, 450, something like that. Do you want to take a wild stab as to what you're really going to pay on a 30-year loan? If you take the bank's plan and go the full route, take a wild stab.
I would say probably almost 500 and some $1,000.
Total or in interest?
What total?
I hate to be the one to break it to you, but $463,000 is just interest. So your real price for that is $963,000.
Wow.
It's what's called the tip. So the bank sells you on the APR, but they charge you on the tip. So your total interest percentage is 115%. So for that $400,000 house, you're paying next to $1 million if you take the bank's plan. A lot of people are not aware of that. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but like this is really what's happening. And until you know it, my good friend says, you cannot tame what you cannot name. So we need to name it. Total interest percentage. This is really what you're battling. Now that we've named it, now we can tame it. How can we figure out a faster route to condense that time and reduce the amount of interest that you have to pay? That's what I'm all about.
Yeah, man, that is crazy.
Isn't that insane? I'm right there with you. I was thinking, 500 maybe total, $963,000. Craziness.
Wow. I'm a big advocate about, man, I just pay stuff off, man. I shoot for it because I know that interest will kill you when it's all said and done.
Yep.
So, Andrew, what's the first step someone should take when they're ready to break from debt and or be, stuck and be ashamed in life and things like that? Because people, they just work. And the most miserable thing I think is that if you just work a job, man, and you just paying, and not having life behind that. you in so much debt because of, you don't know how to manage for one
Mhm.
thing, I
Right.
mean, just one of those things. So what are some of the things that, that people can do to break free from debt?
Yeah, I think that there's so much wrapped into that question because you mentioned like kind of the shame. I think so many people are either afraid to ask for help or afraid to look for help because one, they don't think that there's anything else out there. They think they're going to get scammed or whatever the case is. But I think there's a whole nother level about just feeling ashamed. You're ashamed of your debt. You're ashamed that you're needing help. You're ashamed of all this kind of stuff. Newsflash, everybody's struggling with debt. Like 90% of Americans are struggling with debt, whether they want to admit it or not, whether that's a mortgage, student loans. I found something really interesting the other day that there are a bunch of baby boomers that are carrying like $30,000, $40,000 in student loans, not for themselves, but for their grandkids.
Wow, really?
So being 60, 70 years old, taking out a $30,000, $40,000 loan because they want to help out their grandkids, but they're not going to be able to pay that off by the time that they're, gone on. So anyways, it's just debt is an unfortunate epidemic in our country at this point. So one, don't feel like you're alone. We're all dealing with debt. And then two, find somebody. And I've got a podcast that I'd love to just kind of cross promote here called Money D&A. And I'm happy to send the link to Reginald D if he wouldn't mind resharing that. But my buddy and I talk just about this kind of stuff about what's going on with money, how do we pay it off, what do we invest in first. I mean, there's all of these questions that people have. And so find somebody that you trust, whether it's myself or Dale, find somebody that you trust and start taking action to that. That was our conversation yesterday, is whether you're doing the financial GPS, which is what I promote just because that's the fastest way to get out of debt. There's the debt avalanche, there's the snowball, there's all these different things which are good, and it does condense the time a little bit. I know for a fact that ours does it faster, but whatever the case is, find a plan, find somebody that you trust, and commit to taking action to get out of debt as quickly as possible.
Now you talk about building wealth without sacrificing lifestyle. Now that's a big thing.
Right.
What does that balance look like in real everyday decisions?
Right. No, that is a big one. And that's one that people like yourself pick up on. They're like, hey, buddy, like that sounds good, but like, tell me how that really works. Right. So I will, and I don't mean to throw shade at David Ramsey, right? He's a very, very smart man. He's got a lot of people that follow him. But this is what I know about human nature. People do not want to live on rice and beans for 30 years. Does that sound like a very fun plan for you, Reginald? Like 30 years, rice and beans, no steak, no going out. Do
No,
you
I
think
gotta
that?
have a steak every now and then, man.
Exactly right. So I'm not saying that we don't need to cut back and be aware of our expenses and try to shave those back. But the reality is people do not want to go 30 plus years living on rice and beans. So again, the thing that I love about this financial GPS that I can help people with is that with as little as $100, if we put that in a strategic way, we can start paying that debt down a lot faster and get you out of debt. Our average is, half of the amount of time. So if you got a 30-year loan, we can do this in 15 years, not guaranteed. Everyone's situation is different. But if we can cut anywhere between 5 years and 20 years off of your mortgage, is it worth a conversation? And for me, it definitely was. My wife and I took our 30-year mortgage down to 15 years, and we're set to save $150,000 on our mortgage.
Wow, man. And that's it. So let me ask you this. So how much does a person, because I think when people are saying put, more money towards, the interest, how much is that a month that can take off like 10 years of a mortgage, the interest, or 15 years of interest, or anything like that?
Yeah, it's really hard to know. So yeah, it's so hard to tell. And people honestly ask that question a lot is like, okay, so that sounds good. This financial GPS, how much does it cost? Right. I mean, those are kind of some of the initial questions. It's not as simple of an answer. Think of like insurance, right? I've got two high school boys. Insuring my high school boys for their cars is much different than myself, right? It's the same with, the cost of the program. It's going to depend on a lot of different variables. So all that said, I think your question was how much do you need per month extra to be able to eliminate that. Again, I pride myself in making sure that when I'm talking to people that if it's not like a grand slam, like, my boys used to play baseball, right? If we're not a grand slam, like let's push the brakes before we move forward on this. I want it to be just an absolute no-brainer to move forward on this type of thing.
So Andrew, let me ask you this. One listener today who feels like financial freedom is impossible. What's one of the messages you want them to walk away with?
It's not impossible. So that's the first one. There is hope. There is a better way to get out of debt. My recommendation is to find somebody that you trust. I'm happy to have any conversations with anybody that's interested in that. And if it's not me, then find somebody. But I guess don't give up hope. And I guess come in with an open mind. I think a lot of times people are so jaded and so worried about getting scammed or whatever. I'm not saying don't be cautious, but you need to come in with an open mind that there are ways out there that maybe you're not aware of to help you get out of debt. So come in with an open mind because, if maybe you have the best thing in the world, but if people are closed off to the possibility of that being a real thing, then there's not much that anybody can do to convince them of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think, people have to have an open mind, and not a closed mind, I think. And a lot of the stuff, is generational
Yeah.
stuff, and people never been taught about money and
Yep.
debt and finances.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
and it's critical because, like you said, you go ahead and pay down a house and you put 150 some grand back in your pocket.
Yeah.
That's huge, man. Think $150,000 in your bank.
And I'm gonna say, and I think as much or maybe even more, depending on the person, the time. I mean, the fact that we'll have and I should have mentioned this before, it's not just our mortgage, it's everything. All of our debts is going to be paid off in 15 years, not 30 years, which is what the bank and the credit cards plan is. So think of being able to be debt free. So I'm 45 now. So, being completely debt free by the time I'm about to retire. So then we can travel, we can do stuff, we can go see the grandkids, we can do vacations. You know what I mean? The time freedom of this is just incredible, right? I think that's as much or maybe even more important than just the money freedom.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. Because one thing you don't want is when you retire, and I always say, if I retire, I don't want debt. So I
Mhm.
want to be able to, everything's paid for, I'm gone,
Right.
having a
Yep.
good time and, living life, not trying to figure out, okay, I retire and I got to go figure out something else to do to help pay these bills. And it's just a miserable place to be, right? You talk about, like credit cards, and
Hmm.
God, man, I know people who use a credit card
Mm.
and they have money in the bank.
Yeah.
If something is $500 and they got like $1,500 in the bank, they're like, oh, I don't want to spend this
Right.
$500. I'm just going to put on this credit card. Still, at the end of the day, you're going to have to pay it then some.
Yep. Yeah. I have a couple of thoughts on credit cards if you don't mind me throwing them out there.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So one, and this is something I just learned, not learned, but was phrased to me in such a way that it kind of stuck with me. No one ever got rich off of a credit card reward system. Think about that for a second, right? We're like, oh, well, the points and oh, the miles and then this kind of stuff. And I'm not saying that's not, a cool little perk. You're not going to get rich off of that. That is the reality. No one's going to get rich off of your Apple Cash or your travel miles and this kind of stuff. It's nice, but if you are putting your financial future in jeopardy by carrying your balances over month and month over where you end up paying 20, 30, 50, 100% more than what you actually paid for that, does it even come close to the amount of, hey, I got $20 in Discover Cash? One does not equal the other. So just be very, very mindful. If you're not going to be paying off your credit cards monthly, you need to your point, use a cash system. I realize it sounds old school, but there's a reason that that's a better system.
Yeah, because, like you say, but that interest, man, you be paying for something like, you say, well, I got a good deal. I paid $200 for it, but then
Hmm.
you don't pay $300 for
Right.
it. So whatever the case may be,
Yep.
because of the credit card interest. So, Andy, now here's a tough one, I think.
Okay.
How can couples or families get on the
Mm.
same page
Mm.
financially, especially if they have different spending habits or money
Woo.
values?
You hit that on the head. That is a tough one. I have ran into that a few times with clients that I've worked with, and the short answer is it's not something that can be fixed. Like me coming in and talking to you and trying to help out or whatever. That is a much deeper issue that's going to take a lot longer than just a quick session here to kind of talk through some different ways to kind of save some money. Let's see if I can find. I had a let me take a screenshot of this. I think it's more on the biblical side, but I think, being that you are a minister, I think you will get a kick out of this or vibe with this. It's just talking about the foundations of healthy finance. So let's start with that. I will come back to your, what can we do for couples, right? But let's talk about just the realities of biblical finance. And I think it starts with this first one. Understand that God owns everything, right? It's not your money, it's not his money. God owns all that money, right? The only reason that you have the money that you have in your bank account is because God blessed you with that job, blessed you with the ability to be able to do that. This is my opinion. So start with that mentality. God owns everything and we are just stewards of that money. I think that would eliminate and maybe interject and maybe stop some of these arguments between spouses as far as his versus hers. And then we don't have to go through this entire thing, but the other idea is like debt is a burden, right? Understand that debt is a burden and you need to get out of it as quickly as possible. There's many scriptures that talk about it being a snare, right? Get out of that snare as quickly as possible. So those are just a couple of things. But, to your original question, um, I feel like it has to be just an open dialogue conversation. Don't come in guns a-blazing. Don't be looking for a fight, right? Just say, hey, Reginald, this is what I think about this. What do you think about this? And then just go back and forth, maybe set some parameters of, up to this amount you can spend just without having to, without us having to talk. Anything over $300, $500, let's have a conversation about that. It all starts with communication, right? Be open and understand what the triggers are for each other. I personally am not a big fan of his and hers account. If you're married, my personal opinion is that needs to be your money together, working towards different things like that. If you can see it as our money rather than yours and mine, I think that's going to eliminate a lot of problems. Easier said than done, but that's my opinion.
Yeah, I know. When you got multiple people involved, it's easier said than done. I think one of the things is, where's the goal? Where do we want to be? And
right.
And I think that's easier to kind of get people persuaded to do what they need to do.
Yeah.
Now, here's a big one. What advice do you have for parents who want to raise financially empowered children?
I'm in the process of that right now and doing my best. Both of my parents were accountants, so they knew money. I don't remember them really teaching me budgeting habits, but I've understood money, from a very young age. I've tried to take that to the next level with my boys. If you've ever heard of the envelope system, you ever heard of the envelope system where you say, hey, this is my tithes. So when I get my money, I'm going to put a certain amount of money, my 10% in tithes, and then I set that aside, right? So I can't spend that anywhere else because it's in that envelope. We instituted something like that very, very early on with our boys. We got 2 high school boys, but I think when they were in elementary school, we got them, I think it was 5 different envelopes, right? $10 a month, really, really low to start with, but $1 went in the tithes one. They could put $2 in their savings and $3 or $5 to spend, whatever the breakdown was. So just that initial thought process of giving every dollar a job, that's a budgeting, I don't know what you want to call it, protocol, right? If you can just give every dollar a job, then it's easier to not overspend in certain categories. So start early, start very basic. The envelope systems are a really good place to get things started off on.
That's good stuff. That's good stuff. So, and how can someone begin building long-term wealth, even if they're still paying off debt?
The great question. One of the episodes that I had on Money DNA, we talked about, it's called the birthday cake analogy. So you're starting with cash flow and being able to pay your bills, but then, what are we building our birthday cake on? And the idea was that, you start with protection, make sure that you have some things covered. The second one is debt elimination, then an emergency fund, and then an investment. So it's this, pyramid shape like this. And anyways, the conversation was just about when people get their first big boy job, right? Big girl job, they jump to investments, right? Oh, how do I invest? How do I invest? Well, what if something happens? Are you drowning in debt? So I would say do things in the correct order. Make sure that you're covered. Make sure you have an emergency fund and understand that you're not going to get out of debt overnight. So stick to a process. And again, I realize that I keep plugging my system here, but I love the fact that this financial GPS system that we have gives turn-by-turn directions. It says, hey, Reginald, now would be a good time to make a strategic transfer from your checking into your savings to build up some interest. Okay. Hey, 15 days down the road, now is going to be a strategic time to pay this down to the penny. So you're paying off the maximum amount of interest. So I love not having to overthink things. I just trust a very, very smart system to tell me where to turn and how to spend my money wisely. So that's worked really well for me.
Yeah, I want to get to that part about your company. I want to know a little more about your company, and then I want to know what is one of your favorite client success stories?
Got a couple, actually. So let's start with the success stories. A very dear couple of mine that goes to church with me, talked with them a couple times. It's always a few conversations. And for this couple, it definitely was. They have a 28-year mortgage, debts among different things, a couple credit cards, different things like that. We were able to take them from over 30 years to, I believe it was 4 years, and they were completely debt free. So that is an absolute massive story. And I'm just so happy for them and for the future that they have for themselves now, that they have this straight way to get out of debt in a much faster way.
That's crazy.
Isn't that crazy?
That's crazy.
Right.
I mean, I bet they was like, whoa.
They were pretty excited.
Man.
Yep.
So for someone listening today who feels like financial freedom is impossible, what's the one message you want them to walk away with?
I would say if we had to boil this down to one message, is that there is hope. You have to find the right people to get real hope, because there's some shysters out there, right? I love the fact that the company that I work with has been around for 20 years. We have an A+ Better Business Bureau rating, 4.9 on Trustpilot. So like, it is a legit, trustworthy company that's helped. I think the last time I checked, it was 75,000 people over the last 20 years, and they paid off $2.7 billion in interest. So when you're talking like that level of success, makes it easier to at least hear it out. Again, if it's not a grand slam of a deal, then we don't move forward. But if it's going to save them, thousands of dollars and years off of their debt, then it's definitely worth a free conversation. So that's what would be my recommendation for them.
Man, that's huge, man. They're doing some phenomenal things.
Good stuff, isn't it?
So lastly, Andy, where can our listeners connect with you, access your resources, to learn more about your program?
You bet. So I do have this link tree. If they're watching, they can scan that, but I'll make it really, really simple. So 970-739-2229. That's my cell phone. You can just text me or call me on that. And then my email is empowerwealthsolutions with an S at the end @gmail.com. So we are working on getting our website up. We've got a Facebook group. We've got a YouTube channel. We're working on TikTok. So we're getting more and more content all the time. But at this moment, the fastest way is to just email me or text me, and we can just set up a really quick call, and then we'll just go from there. I'm also building out some extra resources, right? So not everybody is struggling with debt. So what about just the basics of financial literacy, about budgeting, about emergency funds? So I'm building up some resources for folks that maybe debt is not their issue. They just need to know the basics of how to handle their money. So between the podcasts, between the videos, some of the resources I'm building out, I'm really trying to be a good resource for everybody.
Awesome, man. So Andy, thank you so much, man. This is like the most valuable information. I just, people just lose their dreams, they lose their desires because of debt.
Yes, they do.
Things like that. They can't never get to the place they want to be in life, and things they want for their life because of things like this. People don't talk about it a lot.
Right.
Talk about what we want. We want a dream. We want to have this. We want to be this. We want to be that. But then if you can't handle finances, then, 9 out of 10, it's not going to happen.
Yep. Debt will rob you of your future if you don't take care of it. So I would be honored to work with you to take care of your debt and give you a much brighter future. That would be my honor to do that for you.
Absolutely. There you have it, everybody. Andy Bennetts. Andy, thank you so much for taking the time and to hang out with me for a minute, man. It was really, really, I loved it.
Very good. Thank you very much for the time. I appreciate it. And I look forward to talking to any of your listeners. Take care, everybody.
Right, thank you. Thanks for tuning in to Real Talk with Reginald D. If you enjoy listening to Real Talk with Reginald D, please share and review on Apple Podcasts. See you next time.